Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Lucard, and I am an HMIS System Administrator for Montgomery County. In today's training, we are going to look at the backdate function and the odd occasional times that you will use it. In previous renditions of Service Point, your HMIS software, you used backdating a lot. In previous versions, backdating was almost pretty much mandatory in order for reports to run correctly and for work to show up correctly. With this version of HMIS, since all of your work is pretty much done in the entry-exit tab, the need to backdate has been reduced drastically. Still, there are occasionally times when you use it, so we want to take a quick look at it today and show you how it works and when to use it. The backdate function is up here in the upper right-hand corner. I have shadow and backdate. Most of you are going to have entered data as in backdate. Backdate, we just go over here, click on the backdate icon, and this little pop-up comes up. What date do you want to backdate to? The default is 6/8/2021 because that's today. That's the day I'm recording this. And what we want to do is change the date timestamp, the date timestamp of the work that you've done. So we would put in, say, May 1st and choose set backdate. And now you can see the backdate mode is on because the orange part of the screen has now changed to a very fluorescent yellow. If we want to change the date, like maybe we want to do 01/15/2021, hit set backdate, you can see that changes the date. If we want to turn it off completely, we just click on the red X here, and you can see we're out of backdate mode. So when do you backdate? There's very little times you need to backdate if you are doing your work correctly, which is mostly under the entry-exit screen. What we are going to do is look at the times that we do backdate on each of the tabs in a client's profile. As well, just to explain, backdating gives that work that date timestamp we talked about. And we want that so that the work shows up with the correct time. Much like when we do an interim, if the client's information changes on July 3rd, 2021, we want to make sure we have an interim of July 3rd, 2021, because it creates a date timestamp of that. Otherwise, you'd be doing the work on some other time, hopefully not the entry, and your work and thus your reports would be messed up. So we want to make sure that whenever we do work, we are doing it correctly with the date timestamp. Again, almost all of your work is done under the entry exit, which automatically backdates, but there are the rare occasion when we're going to need to use backdate. So let's go in. We click backdate, and we're going to backdate for May 1st, 2021. Hit set backdate. And again, that orange has changed to a fluorescent yellow. On the live site, it isn't orange, but it still will change to a fluorescent yellow. So let's get a test candidate to work with. We're going to do Kenny Omega. And again, we only take the first two letters of the first and last name to start. Why? Because what if Kenny is in here as Kenneth? Or what if Kenny is in here as just Ken? So we want to just take as few letters as possible to do that first search. And if it gives us too many clients, we can start to whittle it down. Let's do the search. We can see Kenny Omega. We double check that the identifiers are right. Social security number, date of birth, make sure we have the right Kenny Omega. We do. So we click on his name or the pencil, and that takes us into his account. Now, usually when you go into a client, you're going to see this. You're going to see a backdate mode. The current system is set to 5/1/2021 because we're already in backdate mode. If you want to use a different date, if you want to use the current date, which is June 8th, end backdate mode, new backdate, use current system date, we're going to do that. And we can see here we are in his account, again, fluorescent yellow. And let's take a look at each tab here to show you when you need to backdate. Under the summary, you shouldn't actually be doing much, if any, editing. Almost all of this is just to let you look at information. If the household is filled in, if case manager is filled in, service, release of information, if any of that is filled in. Because again, we want to do almost all of our work under the entry exit. So here, we don't touch the CES, only certain people do. Case managers shouldn't be doing that. We don't change the gender. The gender is done under entry exit. Same with the SPDATs. We don't want to be doing those here. This screen is just for looking at. The only things we change on the summary page are right here. Information needed for housing referral client document ready checklist, and criminal and rental history barriers. Everything else we shouldn't be doing here under the screen. We should be doing any changes under the entry exit. And the only reason we don't do these under the entry exit is because this is where they are. These aren't under the entry exit. And so to make any changes, like the worker program referring client to housing, are they document ready? Have they ever been incarcerated? Are they on parole? All these questions here under these three sections must be done with backdate mode on. And we want to backdate to the date that you started working with the client. In this case, we know that the client agreed to join your program on 5/1/2021. That's the project start date. And that's why we're backdating on 5/1/2021. So we can start to fill out some of these questions. Yes, we have a birth certificate. Yes, we have a social security card. Yes, we have a government ID, but no, we don't have proof of income. And he's not a veteran, so we don't have to worry about that. This is just an example. These are the questions you want to answer on the screen and with backdate. Right? And it's saying you must do the gender, but we don't want to do gender here. We want to do gender only under the entry exit. And because it hasn't been answered, because someone didn't answer it on the entry exit screen, that's when we get this pop-up saying you must answer. And this is one of those times, this is one of those exceptions, and that's why we're purposely doing this, to show you we can't save the work we actually need to do here under backdate mode because someone didn't do their full entry exit work with the gender. And this is why backdating mode is so important. We do it here. We can do mail. We have our other questions and we hit save. No, we don't need to answer those. Those are optional. So why was it so important that we had backdate mode on to answer the gender question? Well, if we hadn't done backdate mode, his gender here would have been date time stamped with June 8th, which is today's date. Instead, we can click on the history button, which is this little rectangle. We can see that it was done here, 5/1, midnight, mail, because this is the date time stamp we did. Otherwise, it wouldn't show up. If we had done it with the date of 6/8, not only would it not show up properly, but it also wouldn't show up under the entry exit. Because again, the entry exit is date time stamped for May 1st, 2021 at 12:03 p.m., a little after noon. This is basically a snapshot, a Polaroid in time, your start date. And any interims that you do is a photograph. So it is only going to show work with this date time stamp of May 1st at 12:03 p.m. If we hadn't done the back date, we would have had a date of June 8th and the gender wouldn't show up. Let's do an example here. So let's say we hadn't done the gender. I'm just going to delete it here. Right? We're going to delete the one from the entry exit and the one. And now we're just going to do male. Actually, let's make a mistake and say that we set him as female. We aren't backdating, so it's going to have a date of June 8th, right? So let's save. And now our gender has a date of June 8th because we're trying to be proactive and we answered this question under the summary instead of the entry exit like we were supposed to. Let's click on entry exit. Let's go into the project start date. And here we can see the gender is missing even though we just answered it. Why? Because we did not backdate correctly. The gender should be backdated for May 1st, 2021 at 12:03 p.m. or earlier. It will not show any work past this date, past this very second, hour 12, minute 3, second 0. So not only did we enter the gender incorrectly, but because we didn't backdate, it is not showing up here under the entry exit or any interims that are done until June 8th occurs in the interims. It will never show up under the entry date because the entry date is 5/1. The work we accidentally did without backdating on this screen is June 8th, and June 8th is in the future. It's not going to show us June 8th because June 8th happens after May 1st. So it is very important that you do all of your work under the entry exit first, and then come back and do the little bit here that you need to backdate with. So now we've seen a really good example of what happens if you don't do the entry exit first and if you don't backdate. So this is why we do it. And again, the only place we really do backdating in 2021 is here under these 3 sections under the summary. But let's take a look at 2 small other areas that we need to backdate. Again, backdate, May 1st. Under the client profile, we're going to see these same sections, the same ones that we just looked at. Information, client document, right? Criminal and rental history. Again, we want to backdate. These are on both the client profile and the summary. We never touch monthly income. Never, ever, 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 ever make edits to monthly income on this screen, backdating or not. You have to do it under the entry exit with an interim. I cannot emphasize that enough. That's why we have a completely separate income training and 4 supplement income error training. Don't touch that. Here on the profile, the only other thing we do are incidents if you have. You would do an incident here with your backdating on just to be safe. Households, you don't need to backdate. You don't need to do anything with backdating on the households tab. Release of information, you don't need to backdate. Entry exit, you don't need to backdate because the start date and the interims all automatically backdate. Case managers, you don't need to backdate. Service transaction, you don't need to backdate. Case plans, you don't need to backdate. So as you can see, there's only 1 little thing on the client profile and then 3 things that are shared by the summary and client profile. The only other area that you should backdate on is measurements. And that's just to be safe. Add new measurement, you're going to do a SPDAT of some kind, SPDAT or FSPDAT. Just make sure that you're backdating to the date that you actually did the measurement. So you want this date here, date, to be the same as the date you are backdating. And that's just to be safe and make sure everything has a date timestamp. Finally, we have assessments. We don't have to backdate here. We shouldn't be using the assessments tab at all for entering or editing. Every single thing that you have here under the assessments is here under the entry exit. All of your work should be done under the entry exit. So if you want to do a SPDAT, entry exit, do an interim for the date of the SPDAT and do it there. If you need to make an update to the income or their employment or anything like that, your acuity scale, don't do it here under the assessments. Do it under entry exit, create an interim. Today is June 8th. And you would choose your SPDAT or your point in time or your acuity scale. You would choose them all here. See here, here's acuity scale, here's your SPDAT, here's that employment. You do all of your changes here under the entry exit. Anything that you have here under the assessments tab is here under the entry exit. You do an interim for it and you pick the assessment there. You do not pick it here. This is just for viewing. You should not be doing any actual work under the assessments tab. You should just be viewing the work that was done under the entry exit, because if you do the work here under the assessment, it won't generate an interim, and you need to have those interim. As well, if you do the work here, it won't automatically backdate. You do have to have the backdate function on if you do the work here, and so you shouldn't, because not only will you forget to backdate if you're in the assessments tab here, but you will also not have an interim made. So don't do the work under the assessments. Do it under entry exit and create an interim. Once upon a time, you couldn't do the assessments under the entry exit tab, and you're going to find older case managers, people have been doing Service Point for a really long time. They're going to accidentally mess up because they've been in the habit of doing it here under the assessments tab for so long, because for a decade you had to do it under the assessments tab. You choose your history, you enter it there, and you don't want to do that. Way back in the day with the previous version of the system, then you would backdate when you do assessments. Now we just use assessments to look at. We do our assessments under entry exit, we create an interim, and we pick the assessment from the interim that we've made. So we don't need to backdate because we're not actually doing any work under the assessments. If you cannot find the assessment you are looking for in your entry exit, contact your HMIS system administrator like myself, and we will help you find it. You don't want to do the work here because it won't generate an interim, and you'll have to remember to backdate. So again, the only areas that you should ever use backdate mode on in this version of Service Point in this day and time is measurements and those 3 sections under the summary, which are also under the client profile, and also maybe incidents, just to be safe, just to make sure it has the date timestamp correct. And that's it. Backdate is really one of those archaic things that we don't use much anymore in this day and time with this version of HMIS. However, the mode still has its uses. In Montgomery County, you don't have to use it that much. Some COCs, you might have to use it a lot more depending on how they've set it up and what version of HMIS they have. But here in Montgomery County, which we are doing this training for, backdate mode is one of those things you might use maybe 1 to 2% of the time you're in HMIS. And so we just want to cover it for those few times, like we saw a summary, client profile, and measurements, when you might actually have to make a change. And that's it. That's all there is. Backdating is really infrequent in this day and time, but we still want to make sure you know how to use it for those rare occasions when you do. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you learned something a little bit about backdating. Have a great one.